Hey friends, just a quick reminder before we get into today's episode, come join us over on our Patreon. That's where we release bonus episodes every other week, and we've already got over 20 episodes from 2023 that you can download and binge right now for as little as $3 a month. We've covered so many good books there, Haunting Adeline, Chateau, Gothicana, and so many more. That's also where we'll cover any books in a series we continue, so Serpent and Dove, High Mountain Court, Serpent and the Wings of Night. You can continue those series with us on Patreon right now. Finally, as a patron, we let you know what we're going to read every month, so you can read along with us if that's your jam. Anyway, that's all from me. On to today's episode.
Is Jonathan Harker a prisoner husband?
Yes, but the book was written in 1897, so in a very subtle sense, yes.
Okay,
he's
kind
not
of like
mad to be there.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So it's kind of like The Great Awakening, how there was like sex, wink.
Yes, exactly.
Welcome to Your Safe Space, the podcast your partner, friends, parents, whoever thinks is dirty. Don't have time to read books? Want to understand the jokes and the TikToks? We got you, fam. We're the Spice Traders, and we deal in spicy books. I'm Katie, and I need it to make sense.
I'm Liz, and I'm hypercritical. As always, we start every episode with 3 things. The first is a generic trigger warning. You can find specific triggers for this book in our show notes, so please check those out. Also, we do use foul language and talk a lot about sex. If you have sensitivity to any of this, please give this episode a skip.
Secondly, we talk about books. The whole book, nothing but the book, so help me goddess. If you plan to read this book and don't want something spoiled right now, don't listen to this episode.
Lastly, we acknowledge that a good book can hit you at the wrong time. The views expressed in our discussion are our opinion, and we absolutely don't want to diminish the work and the talent of the authors in our community. That said, we have some notes.
Okay, so welcome back to A Dowry of Blood. This is part 2 of 2. So if you haven't listened to part 1 or read the book, do one of those things because you're going to be lost. Part 2 for us is going to cover the books, part of part 2, and then all of part 3, as well as the kind of quasi-epilogue. But if you're looking for a percentage mark because there's not really chapters that you can go to, we are starting at the 50% mark. Okay, so we join our merry band of assholes as they are leaving Berlin. They're each sullen in their own way. So Dracula is brooding and unhappy, his temper coming out, and Magdalena is depressed clinically, and Constanta's kind of stuck in the middle.
Magdalena is a dark, sad woman.
I think I have the line somewhere, but Constanta kind of points out that, like, because Magdalena was such much more of a fully formed person, I think it took her a lot less time to get depressed with her situation than it took Constanta.
Yeah, who had nothing and was just like a peasant girl.
Yeah, nothing and uneducated. She was literally, I mean, we talked about this a lot in part 1, but she had so much more growth to do than Magdalena.
Yeah, where Magdalena was doing like political intrigue and like ruling and
all that fun stuff.
Space. Yeah, because she gets sad fast. And that's interesting because, again, we haven't met Alexei yet, but Alexei gets fed up faster, too. Constanta takes the longest to get there, which makes a lot of sense, honestly.
Yeah. Dracula had the most time to brainwash her relative to the other two, right? And it definitely shows.
Yes.
So they end up going to Russia, and that's where we start part 3 in the book. The year is 1919, right at the start of the Bolshevik Revolution. And as they step off the train in Petrograd, Constanta asks whether it's safe for them to be there. Dracula tells her, quote, "We've waltzed through 100 tiny apocalypses, you and I, walked unharmed through the ashes of countless crumbling regimes. We feast on the ruin of empires, Constanta. Their destruction is our high feast day."
Okay, bro.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but, like, kind of missing the point.
Yeah, you're missing the point of, like, question also.
Yeah. I think this is also the start of a theme where we're seeing Dracula being like overly confident in his own ability to keep them safe. Like, I really don't think that he takes a lot of the technological changes seriously the way that even Constanta does. Because I think she remarks, she says something about how the new machines that man has built will blow someone to bits, vampire or not.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, can we talk about this? And Dracula's like, pish posh, applesauce. Let's move on.
And you're like, ugh. He does. He's cocky, and it does end up being his downfall.
Yeah. So Constanta tells us she doesn't remember much about their apartment there because they didn't stay for long. Dracula was insistent that the city wasn't safe for them to be alone, so he urged them to spend a lot of time at home. Meanwhile, Dracula, quote, trafficked with radicals and constitutionalists, anarchists and Decembrists, and representatives of the Duma, cataloging them with rapt fascination. So he's really making a meal out of the political and socioeconomic change that is happening in the country.
Which is also so interesting because he does seem to fluctuate widely between wanting to be involved and not wanting to be involved. But I think he does want to be involved. He just doesn't want anyone else to be included.
Right, because he can't control it.
Yeah. Because he's a psychopath.
Exactly.
Cool.
So to that point, his very active participation in society makes Magdalena jealous, and she begs him to be involved. So Dracula would do this thing where he would just sprinkle information in their conversations and not really give her the full picture, and he absolutely forbade her from doing correspondence of her own. And she's like, that doesn't make any sense. Even Constanta is just like, you're being ridiculous.
It doesn't make any sense. It's all just control and chaos.
So the result is that Magdalena and Constanta both become super restless, but Constanta remarks inwardly to us that she fears Dracula at this point more than she wants Magdalena to taste freedom, and so they stay shut in, and Constanta encourages Magdalena to follow Dracula's rule.
Because she is the second one in charge.
Yes.
For as powerless as as powerless as she thinks and is, she does have like the second strong, like she really controls Magdalena and Alexei pretty soon for a long time.
She does, yeah. They take direction from her, right? And really, I think it's this thing of like Dracula kind of relying on that because, as we'll see, as soon as they get the idea for them to band together, suddenly that's a problem, right? But Dracula like keeps Constanta under his thumb so that she'll always be on his side.
Yes. And it works for centuries.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But then one day, Dracula has a Manic Pixie Dream Girl episode and takes them to an artist's studio.
Such a fucking weird, like, shift.
Yeah. Well, so there's definitely an ulterior motive here because Dracula wants to introduce them to a new toy, essentially. He tells them before they go that any beautiful thing that they want, tell him and they'll bring it home. He's not just talking about the art.
Also, it's not anything they want. It's the thing that Dracula has already selected for them.
Right, correct. So there's really no choice.
No.
And when they get there, there's a model posing for the artist who's painting him. And he's described as, quote, a young man, golden-haired and lovely, with sea blue eyes and a full, mischievous mouth. Likely not more than 19 years old. So he's basically just an adult.
He's un bébé.
Yeah. Constanta remarks inwardly to Dracula, remember, because she's writing to him, quote, after living with the both of you for so long, I knew trouble when I sensed it.
She knows you well. She's got your number.
Yep. The artist and Dracula seem friendly and familiar. Not in a sexual way, but, you know, the artist calls Dracula by his first name. And Constanta's just like, excuse me. Like, she remarks inwardly, quote, I was impressed, if a little concerned, at your ability to convince a being that you saw as little better than breakfast that you two were bosom friends.
Because, again, he's a psychopath. What is Dracula's first name?
You're the one that read the book. I don't know. I thought it was Dracula.
But it's Count Dracula. So wouldn't that be his last name?
I don't know. Are you looking it up?
Yes. I think it's just Dracula. It just lists Count, and Count would not be his first name, so
Yeah, I
It's
think
just
he's
like
just a singular
Cher?
named being. Cher Dracula.
Cher Dracula.
It would be weird if his name was like Timothy Dracula.
Okay, he has a first name. He just doesn't use it. So, all right, we're going to go two different ways here.
Okay.
In Bram Stoker's Dracula, Count Dracula's first name is never revealed. Even in his correspondence with Jonathan Harker, Dracula never uses a first name, preferring to use his formal title. So, Count.
Got it.
But if you want to go historically, his name would be Vlad because Dracula is based on Vlad the Impaler.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Dracula introduces Constanta as his wife and Magdalena as his ward, which is something that he does regularly. And Constanta remarks inwardly that it had really nothing to do with keeping the peace at home and more to, like, entertain Dracula himself.
I think it's in here or shortly after they meet Alexei that we get more of the Constanta referring to herself as, like, matronly.
Yeah.
Which is not what I pictured.
No. Well, and I think that's just an assumed thing because Dracula's put this on her, right? Because when we see her later, she's very much not owning that anymore.
No. Well, and, like, in thinking about the beginning when she's turned, she can't be, I mean, what is she, in, like, her 20s?
I had that question, too, because she talks about Alexei being super young, but she was turned in the medieval times. So if you made it into your 20s, like...
You were old.
You were old.
And her parents were still alive, too, when she is turned.
So she's got to be...
But they died that night.
She's got to be like late teens, maybe early 20s.
That's what I'm thinking.
Anyway, so they're all introduced, and we learn that the model's name is Alexei. Constanta takes the opportunity to pull Dracula aside, and she reprimands him about his very obvious plan to bring a fourth member into their group. Dracula eventually convinces her to go along with it because Alexei makes Magdalena smile, which is something that she hasn't done in a very long time. And he adds on that if they don't take Alexei, Alexei will likely starve on the streets of Petrograd.
Which is so manipulative.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, Alexei is starving. Like, he's thin and...
You can see his ribs. Like, he is a starving artist.
He is a starving artist.
So Dracula says, quote, "We'd be doing him a kindness, Constanta. He has no one else." Constanta tells Dracula, quote, "I will allow this thing, but for Magdalena's sake and for the boys, not for yours."
It's also strange, too, because in this conversation, it seems like, and I might be misremembering, but it's almost like Dracula says, like, we're not going to keep him forever. Like, we're just going to hang out with him. And then, like, 10 minutes, it's like, just kidding.
Right. Well, and I was confused in that because he does say something very similar to that. I was like, so are you going to turn him and then just, like, let him go?
Yeah, because that confused me because we'll get there, but he does say something like that. Like, we won't keep him forever if he doesn't want to stay. Yeah. And so I was wondering, like, does Lex even know what he's getting into? Which he clearly does, but...
Yeah. He clearly does.
What do these letters say where people are just like, that makes sense. This is fine. I believe this man.
I have to believe that in some cases, like, I don't know, it starts insidiously, right? It's like, hey, how would you feel about living forever, right? But, like, more, I don't know.
Like, in theory?
Yeah.
Like, what would you do if you had all the time in the world?
Exactly like that. You said it much better than I did.
No, yours was good, too.
Thank you. And with Alexei, I think probably he didn't even really listen to a lot of what Dracula was saying because he's just so enamored of him.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But anyway.
I digress.
Back with Alexei and the painter and Magdalena, Constanta can tell that Alexei is into all three of them and that his obvious interest in Magdalena and Constanta pleases Dracula as well. Dracula asks Alexei if he has ever desired sisters, in the not biblical sense, and whether he wants to leave. To which both questions Alexei says yes. Dracula then pays the painter 3 times the sitting fee for Alexei, and they all leave. When Constanta takes Alexei's hand as they leave, She remarks that, quote, a thin fracture ran through my heart that has never been repaired. It was a wound in the shape of Alexi's name, and I scarcely knew how to hold all that feeling inside me. My heart was expanding, making room for him in a world already defined by two great loves, and it hurt so sweetly. But this was different from my obsession with you, Dracula, and my passion for Magdalena. This was the love of the maid for the children in her care, all springtime bloom and tender affection. So again, kind of setting up this weird dynamic between Constanta and Alexei.
Yeah, this like big sister, maternal.
Yeah. She does go on to say that, of course, she desired Alexei as well, but her protectiveness over him was like the stronger emotion.
I did appreciate that was in there. Like, he's also really hot, but I want to keep you safe.
Right. I mean, I think Constanta has to have this feeling because it ends up motivating her to like make the choices that she does, and then she can kind of grow out of it.
Yeah.
But it's weird to read.
It's weird to read, and it goes on for a while. Like, it is firmly established that like they are not intimate until they are.
Uh-huh.
Which
yeah.
also makes it weird.
Well, and it feels like that they were intimate once, and then like that's it.
And then like 50 years pass, and like now we're cool with this.
Right, exactly. She goes on to say that she, at the time, thought that she was protecting Alexei from the world, but in her heart, she knew that she would be protecting him from Drac. As they leave and pile into their carriage, it's clear that Alexei is informed of what's about to happen because he asks whether it's happening now. Dracula tells him essentially be cool, and then yes, it is happening, and he pulls out a little nickname for him, Little Prince.
I kind of liked that.
I did too.
I didn't want to like it, but I did.
I didn't want to like it either, but it was endearing. I can see why Alexei was into that.
Oh yeah, it suits him, and it continues too. Like Magdalena and Constanta also call him like Golden Prince and like those things.
Yeah. So in the carriage, they're on each other immediately. Dracula is kissing Alexei, and then he goes for Constanta while Alexei and Magdalena kiss. Dracula tells Constanta as he kisses her that he loves her. It doesn't take long for them to escalate from this into turning him. So Magdalena bites him first and bites his finger. Then Constanta bites his wrist, and finally Dracula bites his throat. The three of them almost kill him, but Dracula orders them to pull back as Alexei clings to life and offers him his blood. When Alexei comes to again, Dracula asks where he'd like to go. Magdalena exclaims that it's a honeymoon, and Alexei, of course, chooses Paris. And so to Paris they go.
And Dracula hates Paris.
Yeah, Dracula hates Paris. I think he hated it the first time they were there. Definitely hates it the second time. But I feel like this whole thing happened very fast. And I feel like that's because Constanta's telling us and she doesn't remember a whole lot about Russia.
Yeah.
But it felt like Constanta had to go through a lot more of a phase. And I wonder if that was real or if that was because Dracula was telling her a lie.
Yeah.
Because Alexei's turned and he's like, even in the carriage, he's like fucking fine.
The whole thing is very weird. Because he is fine. He, like, they talk about him being, like, a little delirious, but, like, he's good. He's good to go.
So in Paris, they rent another apartment in the middle of the city. The basement is kitted out for Dracula's research, and Constanta remarks, quote, your research had little other purpose than to keep your insatiable curiosity preoccupied so that it didn't devour you the moment you turned your back on it. So she begins to see, or at least now sees, that Dracula had some of the same struggles that she and Magdalena and eventually Alexei have with this eternal life that they are living. In Paris, they attend the theater, and Alexei enjoys his new second life. They're happy for a time. At first, Constanta is not invited into Alexei's bed. They share more a mother-son relationship, as we have alluded to. She tries to protect him when the fighting begins, because Alexei gets under Dracula's skin much faster than Constanta or Magdalena ever had. Mostly because Alexei starts challenging Dracula outright.
Like, pretty quick.
Pretty quick. He's described as, like, kind of having teenager energy, which makes sense because he's 19.
Yes. He's very much like, you're not my real dad.
Right. And he, like, Whereas Magdalena and Constanta kind of just took Dracula's rules at face value, like Alexei questions every single one.
And breaks them.
Yeah.
Blatantly.
One night, Constanta takes Alexei out into the night to avoid another fight, and they talk about Dracula. They end up going into an antique store where the shopkeeper mistakes them for mother and son, and this makes Constanta sour. Alexei, calling her Constance, tells her to cheer up. She's more like their Wendy, alluding to Peter Pan, and Dracula is more like Peter Pan.
Which I did like that comparison because it does make that maternal vibe less creepy, because Wendy is the same age as the Lost Boys, but has that just maternal nature.
I agree.
Without it being like, I'm 50 and you're 19, which is kind of the vibe I was getting for a hot minute.
I mean, she is hundreds of years old and he's 19.
Yes.
But I mean, that is the vibe that we have quite frequently in these romantasy like books. It's just reversed.
Exactly.
So in this moment, Constanta can't deny the lust that she feels for Alexei, but she tamps it down as something that isn't hers to act on. As time goes on, Alexei develops friends through this entire city, and this is despite Dracula's disapproval. It's clear that Alexei has a thrill-seeking streak. He carries a gun. He's tempting Magdalena and Constanta to drink from him, even though that's a dangerous thing to do. And he yearns to be on stage again. But again, Dracula discourages this. One night, Dracula and Constanta come home from hunting to find that Alexei has brought a troupe of actors into their home and is entertaining them in the parlor. This is absolutely forbidden. They never have guests over.
Oops.
And it's clear that Dracula is very, very bad. But they can't, talk about this openly, so they join Alexei and his group, and Magdalena's there as well. And as they do so, even Constanta is enchanted by the liveliness the troupe brings to their home. Dracula sits, and his mood seemingly shifts to jovial as he takes one of the young lady actors onto his lap. But quickly, he bites her and drains her of life in front of everyone, and that causes the other actors to run screaming from the house.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
There's just this dead body. And Dracula's like, look what you made me do.
Yeah, essentially. And this obviously erupts in a fight, right? And so Dracula sends Magdalena away, leaving Alexei and Constanta in the room. And Dracula reprimands Alexei for his recklessness, telling him that they are lions among lambs and that there's no place for them in human society, despite the fact that Dracula regularly interacts with human society.
All the time.
Alexei cries and tells him that he needs friends like he needs life. Then Dracula slaps Alexei really fucking hard. Makes him fall to the floor. And this breaks Constanta out of her centuries-long haze of denial. She says, quote, "That slap snapped me out of a reverie I had been living for hundreds of years. It obliterated any grace I had left to give you, any lies I was still telling myself about your good intentions and your savior's heart. I had always comforted myself in the dark hours after any of our arguments with the thought that at least you had never hurt any of us. You would never hurt any of us. You only wanted what was best for us, and you were harsh because you loved us. But now, all my carefully crafted excuses for you dissolved like sugar under absinthe, revealing a truth I had spent centuries avoiding."
We mentioned this in part 1, but this is such a perfect description of abusive relationships.
Yep. 100%.
And where those lines are.
And it also is a very good depiction of Dracula's blind spot, right? His hubris gets him into trouble because he thinks that he can just snap his fingers and keep these people in line. But he killed a woman outright in front of witnesses in their fucking house.
Yeah. Bro.
They're renting. Come on, man.
They're just renting a townhome in Paris. And there's 6 or 7 of them that get away.
Yeah, exactly. They don't make any attempt to keep these people there. And I think that's intentional for Dracula because he uses this as now we have to leave because of what you made me do.
Because of what yeah. This was also, we mentioned this in the first part, but the writing that S.T. Gibson, the word she uses, my carefully crafted excuses for you dissolve like sugar under absinthe. Like, her writing is so beautiful.
I also love that too because it's very in line with like where they are. They're in Paris in the early 1900s. Like absinthe was a big deal then. Like they were having like clubs would have those big absinthe like decanters. Have you ever seen some of those?
Yes.
Very cool. So Dracula ends up taking them to a dilapidated country house in the middle of nowhere and literally locks them in there. So very much how he kept Constanta for the first 100 years of her life or so. And in this state, they all descend into their own sorts of melancholy, and Constanta feels that she's again in the middle.
She's mommy.
She's mommy. She's just trying to keep the peace, man. Why can't we all get along?
And why can't we all just be friends?
One night she finds Alexei and he is crying. He asks her whether Dracula knows how cruel he could be, and she doesn't answer him but holds him. He kisses her and they end up having sex for the first time. And it's really rushed and like awkward.
I think she even says something during her monologue like it was like virgins in their first time, because it's just like awkward and fast, and she says like it was sweeter because of it, but I'm like, okay. But this scene just made me feel a little weird.
Yeah, she's definitely romanticizing it a bit.
Yeah.
But it's very much like they're giving into mutual feelings of attraction, but trying to blow off some steam almost.
Yes, exactly. Because they do have the attraction and they do trust each other, and he needs comfort. So.
Yeah. Shortly after this, though, she runs into Dracula, and he can tell immediately that they had sex for the first time, and he cruelly tells Constanta that Alexei has only been with her because Dracula and he were fighting, and because Magdalena is melancholy.
So you were just the last man standing, so...
Yeah.
Ugh. It's gross.
And during this time, really after that remark, is really when Constanta really starts to formulate a plan. And that plan will ultimately see the demise of Dracula and her and Alexei and Magdalena's freedom.
There's the quotes as she starts to really get to this place. Again, I really liked the lining up of it with like finally coming out of an abusive relationship in this haze. She says, there was no huge argument that predicated my decision to betray you, no ultimate act of tyranny. I simply broke under the weight of 1,000 tense nights, 1,000 thoughtless, soul-stripping words.
Again, such a really good illustration of an abusive relationship.
Yes.
So one night when Dracula is out hunting, this is something that only he is allowed to do, the three of them are left alone, and Constanta brings up her plan, or her inklings of a plan, with Magdalena and Alexei and asks for their help. She proposes that they search Dracula's study for answers as to what they are, what their powers are, and how one of them can be killed. The others are shocked to learn that Constanta has done this before, and what she's learned and when she did that, basically that he had other husbands and wives before, and they were, quote, put down.
Like a horse with a broken leg.
Ugh.
I know.
And that knowledge galvanizes the other two into helping her going through with this plan. Magdalena especially asks Constanta to find something that will make Dracula hurt.
I love Magdalena's like, okay, I'm here and we're going to make it suck for him.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I feel like as soon as Magdalena was given like a path out, she was like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's do this.
Yes. I really was grateful that once Constanta comes to this decision and shares it with the other two, we don't get this like back and forth of it'll be okay, we should do it, we should not do it, we should do it. Like, I'm glad it's like, we have this thing, I have a plan, let's do it right now.
Yeah, because Dracula's gone, and so they do it that same night.
Yes.
Like they don't wait until the next time. Like it's just like, okay, we're cool, let's do it. Go.
Yeah. And they even say like, I don't know when we're going to get this chance again. Like, we have to do this.
Right. So to that end, Constanta and Alexei go into Dracula's basement study and they search. They end up finding a journal that details exactly what they need. Specifically, how Dracula killed his own sire. And when they go back upstairs, Dracula has returned home. But he has returned home empty-handed. He has not fed because he was seen, basically caught in the act. Magdalena scoffs that he's undone them all because he was clumsy. And this puts Dracula into even a worse mood. And he moves to strike Magdalena, but Constanta moves in his way. Dracula grabs Constanta's throat and tells her that he is tired of her undermining him and will not tolerate it anymore. He tosses Constanta aside and strides out of the room. When they are alone, the three of them agree that they will stand against him, given that Constanta has found a way to kill him.
And this is where we start to see Dracula's hubris, too, because the three of them try to say, like, hey, you were seen. Like, we need to, like, do we need to go? And he's like, nah.
We're fine.
They're too afraid of us.
The villagers will never come up here.
And then, like, 10 minutes pass, and
immediately the villagers are there. So yeah, the villagers come to avenge the boy that Dracula was seen trying to kill. And I think it's worth noting here that Dracula was preying on a child.
I forgot about that. It's fucked up. Yeah. He's gross. He's like
Constanta really doesn't remark about it, but like which is kind of surprising because I thought she would have had more of an issue with him preying on innocents like that.
Yeah, me too. Maybe she was just had an issue with all of it, so now it's like, all right, well.
Right. She's just like, well, you're a piece of shit and I know that. So what's one more?
Right. Like, why even be mad about this?
So with the villagers at the gates to their property, the three of them beg Dracula to do something, but he's complacent. He tells them that the house is a dark labyrinth, and if any of the villagers make it inside, the four of them will pick them off one by one.
Bro, what kind of plan is that?
I know. And it doesn't even consider other possible outcomes. Like, what if they set fire to the house? Like,
which,
there are so many other
alert,
things. Right.
There's a reason that it is a trope with the torches and pitchforks.
Yes.
They're not just going to knock on your door and be like, oh, guess he's not home. Like,
let us in, sir.
Bro, what?
Yeah. So Constanta goes to put furnishings in front of the door as a barricade, and the other two follow her out. Dracula suspects nothing as Constanta tells them that they should act now. So she's not really barricading the door. They're formulating a plan. Alexei balks, saying that he knows that Dracula loves them, but Magdalena tells him, quote, it would be easier if he hated us, but he loves us all terribly, and if we go on letting him love us, that love is going to kill us. That's what makes him so dangerous. So Constanta asks them to bring Dracula into the bedroom.
I really like this line because Dracula is, like, just doing whatever. And Constanta says something to Magdalena, like, do you think you can get him to the bedroom? And Magdalena has some line that's like, that's never been the problem.
Yeah, I like that too.
I was like, you go, girl.
Yeah. And the plan is basically to ambush him when he's not expecting it in their bedroom. So Constanta goes into the bedroom first, and she arranges herself on the bed in a Victorian-style nightgown that she knows that Dracula likes. When the other three appear, Dracula is indeed taken aback, utterly in awe of Constanta, who has, at this point, basically like a come-hither look and pose going on. So Dracula joins her on the bed, and Constanta manipulates him onto his back, kissing him like she'll never kiss him again. Spoilers. Once he's there, the other two hold his shoulders to the bed so that he can't move, and Constanta brings out an old wooden rod from the staircase that's been sharpened into a point. Dracula then understands what's happening and asks her to put it down. And if she does, he'll forgive her. They'll never talk of it again.
Yeah, okay.
In that moment, Constanta sees all of the tender moments that they've spent together, but even that can't change the fact that most of their existence has been one with a cruel and arrogant man. When Dracula realizes that Constanta won't be moved, the cruelness comes out. He tries to command her to obey him, but she does not. She says, quote, I was tired of carrying around the weight of love like worship, of the sickly warm rush of idolatry coloring my whole world. I was tired of faithfulness. I made you into my private Christ, supplicating with my own dark devotions. Nothing existed beyond the range of your exacting gaze, not even me. I was simply a non-entity when you weren't looking at me, an empty vessel waiting to be filled by the sweet water of your attention. I love that description so much because I feel like it is the worst case scenario when you're either in that situation or you give over to like a limerence or anything like that. It's just so beautifully put.
She's such a good writer. I really want to read more of her things.
I do too.
There's another line in here during this kind of argument, and her inner monologue or letter to him says, "But a few flourishes and embellishments couldn't change the fact that the very fabric of our life together was dark and tangled and suffocating. I had given you 1,000 second chances, made 1,000 concessions." And she says to him when he says like, "Oh, I'll forgive you, won't talk about that again." She calls him out on, "Is that what you told the others before you killed them?"
Yeah.
And I love that she's like, "I'm smarter than that."
Right.
Dumbass.
You're putting your own expectations on my intelligence again, and you're wrong.
Right.
So Magdalena and Alexei hold strong as well, and they hold Dracula in place while Constanta shoves this sharpened wooden stake directly through Dracula's heart. She pushes it in so hard that she breaks his ribcage and pushes it into the mattress below.
Damn.
This does indeed kill Dracula. And in the aftermath, all three of them drink deeply from him, and they feel the power that can only be given from drinking blood from your own sire. This was what was detailed in Dracula's own account of killing his own sire. Once the bloodlust has worn off, both Magdalena and Alexei look to Constanta for what to do. They're looking for direction because they've been taking direction for so long from Dracula, and now they are unfamiliar with how to make decisions on their own.
Yeah. Daddy's dead, so mommy will tell us what to do.
Right. Couple that with the fact that the villagers are now at the doors to their like ramshackle villa that they're staying in.
Yeah. When Dracula is like trying to convince them they'll be fine, he even says like they won't get past the gates. And I'm like, what gates? Like
right.
This is like a shack. What?
Yeah. Like, have you reinforced the gates? Like, do you have dogs? Like, what makes you so confident?
Right. His own confidence. See where that got him.
So Constanta takes Dracula's body out and gives it to the villagers. And she basically says, "This is your demon. Do with him what you will." And the villagers descend on the body. She uses that opportunity to go back in the house, and she and the other two grab whatever valuables they can carry, and they flee into the night. As they look back, they see the villagers setting fire to the house, burning every evidence of their life there. Again, Dracula didn't even consider the fact that villagers might not even enter the house and just set fire to it while they're inside.
He's so cocky. And I do love that that's his downfall, because he is so confident that like he knows what's right, or he knew what's right because he's dead now, bitch.
Yeah. So before we move into the next section, this was really satisfying. We talked about it a little bit in our debrief, but I just want to say, because we spent so long in part one being wary of whether or not we would have a satisfying ending to this terrible relationship, and we really do. Like, the murder of Dracula was graphic, and rightfully so. Like, it really had that satisfying crunch.
Yes. Because I know usually we have talked in other books that like when things get graphic and violent when they don't need to be, we're like, why? Ugh. Why is it here? That term is exactly right. That satisfying crunch. Like, we needed it to be a graphic. Like, it was so fulfilling to see. I'm so glad it wasn't a door closed. Like, and then we killed him. Like, I loved that she also gave the body to the villagers to like desecrate, and they didn't try to give him any last honors or anything like that.
Nope, not at all. Yeah, I do too. I also, like, I'm not one for, I don't read horror. I don't like gory things. But I ate every word of that scene up.
Yes. It's also so, I mean, we've read so many quotes in this book, but it's so beautifully written. Even the gory stuff was still beautifully written.
It really was, yeah. And I appreciated the description of the bloodlust afterwards, because they're all kind of in shock of what they did, and it just kind of came naturally after, like, Constanta killed him, and then they all kind of knew what to do, and then afterwards they were just like, what the fuck, man?
I know. I do. When they're drinking, her line is, "I apologize if you were expecting contrition, my lord. I don't have any to muster."
Yes, exactly. So we get a little bit of wrap up now. This is before the epilogue, and we see the three of them basically on the wharfs where there's a ship bound for America about to leave. The three of them are saying goodbye to Alexei, who will be on that ship bound for America. We learn that they are all going their separate ways. So obviously Alexei's going to America. Magdalena is going to Rome to study. And Constanta is not sure what she'll do, but she knows that she wants to meet people and make friends and be out in the world living. She also wants to see her homeland again, which is Romania. Constanta writes, quote, "So I will put down my pen, I will tuck these pages away in a drawer and tuck the memories of you away in my mind, and I will go out into the world and live. I will build an undying family of my own, and there will be no raised voices or locked doors between us. Your memory will fade to shadow, and I shall never speak your name again, not even when I tell my lovers the story of how we two met. There will only be sweetness and kindness, and 100 years of bliss."
Oh, it gives me chills.
I know. I'm just so, like, this book was so well written, and I'm just so happy that they all got a happy ending.
Exactly. And I love the way it was tied up, because I do like that we see them kind of go their own way and find their own freedoms too, instead of just staying together and staying this like fearful unit because they don't know what to do.
Yeah. I had that kind of bittersweet moment. I was like, oh, they're like, the band's breaking up. Yeah. And they even have that like moment. They're like very sad to leave each other, but they say, you know, as they're saying goodbye, that, you know, we will see each other again. It's just we need to do this.
Yeah.
And I think reflecting on that now, they very much needed to do that.
Yes, it was so important. And I also really loved her lines here of there will be no raised voices or locked doors between us, because it feels like that breaking of the generational trauma, like an intentional, like, I'm not going to do this to anyone else.
Right, exactly.
And that's
relatable.
Also, yes. I'm sure for you right now. Oh my God.
So we do have an encore. It's called the Encore of Roses. And this is essentially an epilogue. And it's told from the perspective of Alexei. We see him as he performs on stage, knowing that Constanta and Magdalena are in the audience watching him. We see them reunite for the first time in 30 years behind stage after Alexei's performance, and he is incandescent to see them. As they embrace, Alexei reflects that it still hurts to see them because he knows that he's no longer the sun in their sky. They've both made their own lives with new lovers. And Alexei really hasn't. He's made a life for himself in New York, and he loves it there. He loves being on stage, and he has many friends, but he remarks inwardly that though he takes lovers, he hasn't really found anybody that he wants to spend a lot of time with.
Yeah, like he takes like an occasional bedmate, but not a like committed partner.
Right, and he certainly hasn't turned anybody.
No.
So the three of them go out into the city to find coffee and a sweet. Alexei still indulges and enjoys human food, and he says about America, quote, "She was brazen and loud and in love with herself, just like me."
I really like Alexei.
I do too, and I really like the description of America.
As brazen and loud and in love with herself, like,
yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I am too.
Want that on a t-shirt.
As they sit in the cafe, they talk about their lives together. We learn that Constanta has turned two of her lovers into vampires. Their names are Henry and Sasha. We learn that Magdalena prefers her human lover and says that the eternal life is not for him, and so she doesn't have any plans to turn him. She accepts that he is temporary.
But he also knows what she is, which is... I like that.
I thought that dynamic was so interesting. Like, I would love to read that love story.
Me too, because I think Alexei even says, like, but he's gonna age. And
ew.
I know, and Magdalena's like, okay, so he ages, or it ends tomorrow. Like, who's to say?
Right, exactly.
And I just
I
love
like that too. I would love to understand, like, how did you find him? Like, how did you have that conversation?
Exactly. Like, hey, so BT dubs, this has been going on for a while, and we need to have a talk.
We need to have it. You might have noticed that I can never have lunch with you.
Right. And that my hours are very strange. Because she even says that, like, he adjusts his hours. That way he is, like, awake with her at night. But
yeah, which I thought was super cute.
It was so cute. But, like, what a weird... Hey, you want to have lunch? No.
I can't.
I cannot. Also, when we do have dinner, I cannot eat.
Right. Well, I'll eat, but I won't eat your food.
I will eat you.
Yes. So Constanta and Magdalena ask Alexei whether he has any lovers, and he feels caught out because, as we mentioned, though, he takes his pleasure from partners now and then. When he thinks about a lover, he can only think about the two of them.
Oh.
So they go back to Alexei's apartment and they start enjoying each other. We learn that Alexei is a bit of a masochist, and Magdalena is happy to indulge in that. She and Constanta both end up edging Alexei, and as they have him kind of like begging for more, they demand to know why he's so sullen. Like they've picked up on the mood, and they're like, all right, spill the beans. Let's go.
Let's go. Now that you're right on the edge, what's up?
And it's cute because he ends up like whining that this isn't fair. Like, you can't do this to me.
Yes.
But he does eventually tell them it's because that he thinks that they don't love him like they used to. When he says this, though, the sex stops immediately. And both Constanta and Magdalena move to comfort him and hold him and assure him that he is still their whole world. They thought they were essentially giving him space because in his letters he expressed how happy he was in New York and thought he was fine because he always raves about his life in America.
He never said that he missed them.
Correct. Right. They go on to say that they'll stay for as long as he wants, and when they go back to Europe, they'll take him with them. They then go on to enjoy each other in the most graphic scene that we get in this book, but that is still a little surface level.
It is. And it's still like, it feels almost fade to black.
Yeah, it is a little fade to black because we certainly don't get graphic language like cocks and tits and things like that. And we don't get even like a play-by-play of, you know, they start, they have a middle, and then they have an end. It's really just they go on to enjoy themselves, and then we see the aftermath.
Yeah, which was kind of a bummer because I would like to see that.
It's kind of a bummer, but I did appreciate that the only happy depiction of sex was in this scene, and it was the most graphic.
That was a really nice way to lay it out because we don't get any nice depictions of sex with Dracula in any combination.
We really don't even get graphic depictions of sex with Dracula.
No, we just know that it happens.
Yeah. So the last bit of this book that we get is that the three of them fall asleep in each other's arms, and Alexei is soothed and content with being the three of them together. And that's how the book ends. Very sweet ending.
I really loved the ending of this book, and it made up for all of my concerns in the first half where I was like, because it's the perfect ending. And we knew from the beginning, like we talked about, that we knew Dracula died from the beginning. And it was also very heavily implied that Constanta killed him. But I was still a little worried that he just kind of like dies in a fluke, or it was like she pushes him in front of a train or something.
Right, or like he was already dying and she could have saved him but chose not to.
Yeah, and not this no, this was an conscious act that we have done.
Yeah, this is murder.
This is murder. And then to gain his power is just like icing on the cake.
Yeah, I really like that too. Like, not only did we kill you, we took what power you had and we're going to use it for good. Okay, so Liz, how did we rate the spice level?
We both gave it a 1. As we've said, there's really only one. Okay, there's 2 scenes that we get, but they're both door closed. They're not specifically explicit. They're not really detailed. They just happen and we know them. They happen. There is enough romance in here. It is a very romantic story. So there is sex. It gets a 1. It's just not spicy. I'm not mad about it, though, because of the other things we're going to talk about.
Agreed. So let's move into writing style. We rated that a 5. And I think this is the first book besides Nettle and Bone that we rated a 5.
Yeah.
And the reason that we rated it a 5 was because of, this book is just beautiful. And I feel evangelical about how beautiful this book is. I think we even said that in part 1.
Yes, already in part 1 before finishing it. I was very much like, this writing is amazing. It's like T. Kingfisher.
Yep. It's lyrical, it's beautiful, and I don't want to misspeak, but I believe S.T. Gibson was the one who had a degree in creative writing.
Yes.
And boy, can you fucking tell.
For real. Also, like, does she teach? Because
I know, I would love to take that class.
Because her writing is amazing. And it is that, like, I want to tell people to read this book. I don't give a shit if you don't like vampires. Read it because it's so beautifully written.
There's not even a lot of vampire like stuff in it.
It's just the undercurrent of like them.
They're living forever because they're vampires.
Yeah, and then like sometimes they kill people, but like that's it.
Yeah. Not only is it beautifully written, I mean, it's accessible and it's structured well, and what did you call the style of this book?
Epistolary.
The epistolary nature of like the letter writing is very interesting, but she makes it topical, right? So that line about absinthe is the one that pops to mind the most, where she describes being in a mood or a place in like a very time and place appropriate language, like using absinthe as the metaphor in that context when they're in Paris in the 1920s. Yes. That's just one example of how she makes the writing and the time and the place come alive.
Yes. And it was we didn't really talk about that too much besides that example, but it's so masterfully done to have, I mean, this book is a MIDI, but to cover so much time without feeling like we're slogging through time.
Yes.
It's this very like, much. I'm not a vampire. I don't know what it's like, but I almost get the feeling of that's what it must feel like. This like seamless, like changing with the world as you age. Or as you don't age and everything else does.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to point out in that same vein is that this book is not very long. It's just under 300 pages and words. It's just under 300 pages. And she does very effectively craft these places and this time, like, with very few words. She focuses on the interpersonal relationships really well and communicates that masterfully, but you know, she doesn't go into pages and pages of like description when they're in Carnival in Venice, for example. She just gives you enough to let your mind fill in the blanks, and I think the way that she does that, a lot of authors could benefit from.
Yes,
because like I feel like a lot of authors try to describe every single little detail, and she hits that sweet spot of giving you just enough so you know where you are without belaboring the point.
Exactly. But I did feel immersed in the world. I didn't have a moment of like, where are we? Or if I did, like a little bit in the beginning where we're bopping around, I didn't really care because I was still so immersed in at least the time period we were in.
Right. And again, that fit because Constanta was so young and she didn't really know where they were.
No, which is, there was a something I wanted to point out from the epilogue that was a fun callback. So in part one, we talked about how Constanta and Magdalena are experimenting with feeding from humans and not killing them, and Dracula didn't like that. And then when we get the epilogue, Alexei says something to Constanta like, you should be so proud, I haven't killed anyone in decades.
Yeah, exactly.
So like they're effectively feeding without killing anyone, and I just really liked that callback.
I did too. And Magdalena is essentially doing the same thing.
Yeah.
One should assume.
Yes.
So let's get into quality of storytelling. How do we rate that?
We also gave this a 5. And again, very much tied with the writing style and a lot of what we were saying. This plot just flows. There aren't any plot holes. I never felt like I got too much information. It is very, how do I want to say this? Her writing isn't simple, but the way the information is delivered is simple in that I don't feel like I have an info dump, but I also don't feel like I'm missing any information.
Yeah, I agree.
It all
wholeheartedly
made sense. The timeline made sense. The process of the growth of the characters made sense. I didn't feel like anything was particularly rushed or too drawn out.
Yeah, the pacing was really good.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of loose ends.
No.
Yeah.
My only complaint, which it doesn't matter, is I do wish, and I think that's just the nature of the way the book is written because there aren't chapters really. I wish that the epilogue had been almost more clearly titled, because I almost skipped it because I thought it was like a sneak peek at a different book.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point.
So I would tell someone, if I am recommending it, I would tell someone, hey, read The Encore of Roses. Like, that is still in this book. Because the only reason I even read it was that I skimmed and I saw our characters' names. And I was like, oh, okay. But I thought it was like, read ahead for a different book by this author, which I usually don't do. Even if I like the author, I don't do that because I don't want to start a book, quote unquote.
Yeah, agreed. That's a good call out. So, do we recommend this book?
Yes!
Yes, we do.
So much. I want to buy it.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. I want to highlight everything in it. Just like, I want a shelf of like, here are the books we've read, and then here are the golden stars, like T. Kingfisher.
Yep.
And S.T. Gibson.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, so good.
All right, guys.
So
We did it. Those are our thoughts on A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Thank you, as always, for joining us on this journey. What did you think? Let us know on the socials. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Goodreads at Spice Traders Pod. And if you like our podcast and want more, consider joining our Patreon, where we release Patreon-exclusive episode on our off weeks. And if you really, really like us, drop us a review wherever you listen. Until next time, we'll see ya. Bye.
Bye.